that. And that's pretty much how the Black community decided to celebrate civil rights in the month of February for their birthday. So Black History Month is geared around Abraham Lincoln and then also Frederick Douglass.
Wow, that is so amazing. And can I brag? I was also born in February. So I feel so connected today. Yes, folks, I was also born in February, and I'm so glad to hear that Abraham Lincoln was born in February and Frederick Douglass was born in February also. So Dr. Davis, would you like to tell us a little bit about maybe Frederick Douglass a little bit so our audience can understand why it is so significant for Black History Month?
It's 10 o'clock.
So Frederick Douglass was an African-American man who was very eminent on human rights in the 19th century, and he pretty much was the first Black person to come to the U.S. government to make sure that our voices was heard, and that pretty much stating that our lives matter and everything does not have to be generated and geared around slavery.
Thank you. This is so awesome. So folks in Nepal, if you ever come to this country and visit Morgan State University, you will see a big statue of Frederick Douglass standing in front of the signature building of Morgan State University. Every day I go to work, I see the big statue of Frederick Douglass. So as Dr. Davis explained, he was the first person to come to the US government, and he gave voice to the aspirations of the Black community. Thank you, Dr. Davis. Now, I will switch to Dr. Gibson and ask her a question. Dr. Gibson, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, tell us, what is the significance of Black History Month?
So I see Black History Month really as a time of exploration and knowledge, specifically regarding some of the wonderful things that Black people, specifically in America, have contributed towards this country. I don't know what your students' conceptions are of life in America, but we live, although a wonderful country and a wonderful place to live, racism persists. And when I'm talking about racism, I'm saying that there are people who look at specific groups of people. So often individuals who are white and who come from a higher socioeconomic background, and that doesn't even have to be the case these days, but they look at Black people and Latino people and other groups of brown folks, and they make all types of negative assumptions about who we are. And based on these assumptions that they make, these are the same individuals who are responsible for the textbooks that are read, that are written, that are responsible for the lessons that are given in schools that are generated. These are the folks who tell our stories about how America was created and how it has become this great nation. And often those stories, unfortunately, leave out a lot of the experiences and contributions of not only just Black Americans, but just different populations in this country that often are not white and don't come from wealthy backgrounds. So Black History Month, it's an opportunity to really, we have a platform during February and more opportunity to tell our stories, and people tend to be a little more open and responsive to hearing it, specifically during Black History Month. But so while it is significant, the reality is when you talk about American history, Black people are infused within that, but unfortunately our stories just tend to not be told. So Black History Month, February, is often an opportunity for people to have more platforms, more opportunities to tell about the stories that often you don't hear about the contributions of Black people throughout, American history.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. I request audience in Nepal to put down your questions and hold on to them. And when we are done with our conversation, we will open for questions for you. So it would be great when you direct the question to either Dr. Davis or Dr. Gibson or myself, even though the highlight is definitely Dr. Gibson and Dr. Davis here. So Dr. Gibson just explained that the phenomena that exists here, unfortunately, even in the United States, racism, that minimizes the amazing, amazing history of Black people. As I emphasized earlier, Black history is actually human history, but that is minimized. And 1 month of celebration is not enough. And February is the shortest month. That just flies by, as my birth month does. But this is a great opportunity for us to be aware of what it is, okay? So I'm gonna ask Dr. Davis a question, if I may. By the way, Dr. Davis is also an inventor. She is a professor at the Family and Consumer Sciences at the College of Education at Morgan State University. She has invented many things, and also she is going to talk to us about, I think it's a good question to ask her, how has dress evolved in the Black culture around Black History Month? Dr. Davis.
That is a very good question. So I wanted to explain that dress in the Black culture plays a huge part leading up until today's time. So in the 1600s, African-American dress is pretty much incorporated by the history of Africans. So during the slavery time, the white owners demand certain styles of dress for those that were in bondage. So they had a particular dress if you were a house servant, a particular dress if you were out working in the fields, particular dress also for children as well. But around the time in 1960s, that is when the equal rights for African Americans became legalized. So the African Americans was able to tell a story of their own with their own style of dress, even though they were doing it a little here and there when they have their gathered meetings with their own community. They will still dress up what the owners has given them to wear at the time, but around 1960s, African American styles have definitely expanded where they can become more social and express their own social identity through dress.
Wonderful. I see some hands being raised. Please hold on to your question. We'll come back to you soon. Okay, thank you, Dr. Davis, for explaining the evolvement of dress. Yeah, my folks back in Nepal maybe do not have this experience, but I'm every day amazed by the styles, the colors that is, shown off in the dresses that Black people wear. This is spectacular. And Dr. Davis definitely is one of the experts in the area. So maybe it is fair to ask me the significance of colors, because Black people like to wear colorful dresses. Dr. Davis, would you like to explain why, and if the colors have, I'm sure they have the significance and meaning to it?
So colors, why most African Americans wear bright colors, is that your question? Can you repeat the question?
Yes, the significance of colors in the Black History Month. It's okay. You can maybe tell us how we can understand the Black culture through Black History Month. Because I know colors are involved, but not everybody may be able to explain those. It's fine.
So the colors for Black History Month. So you have red. So red symbolizes the blood that unites all the people of Black African cultures. So it sheds liberation. Black is for Black people of the nation that kind of have to express love, support, and comfort. And then the green symbolizes the wealth of Africa, the abundance of natural wealth of Africa.
Wow, those are all very powerful. Black means love, support, and comfort. Red means we are all united by the same color of blood across the universe, right? We are all brothers and sisters. This is so powerful. And green signifies the abundance in Africa, the flora and fauna. This is amazing. Thank you, Dr. Davis. Appreciate it. Now, if I may, I would like to ask Dr. Gibson, how can people outside the USA celebrate Black History Month in their own community?
So, if I can, let me just say, like, I don't know how much you all have seen, I don't know what exposure you have to Black people in America. But I think very often when Black people are portrayed within movies and television shows, we have very similar characteristics, which often tend to be negative. And I think it's really important, just like folks from Nepal, just like folks from anywhere in the world, we're not just one thing, right? We're not just one way. We all look different, we sound different, we have different interests. So when we're talking about Black History Month, it really is a celebration of our similarities, but also our differences. And again, we have more of a platform during this month to just talk about not only our differences, but the histories, right, of how we are similar and different, and some of the awesome things that we have done and accomplished throughout history. So I just wanted to put that out there, that we're not all the same. We don't like all the same things. We're not a monolith, right? In terms of the significance of Black history and how, for instance, in Nepal, this is something that you all also could honor. Again, for me, Black history is about a time of exploration of stories and experiences, specifically of Black folks, that often you're not going to hear. And I'd imagine there's similar explorations in Nepal as well, right? There are lots of stories, often maybe about history or just about some of the awesome things that are going on in Nepal, but unfortunately only limited viewpoints regarding these wonderful things are presented, right? Their story isn't told. So Black History Month is really just an opportunity to explore and tell new stories, create a new narrative or a different narrative about this country, the history in this country, and just, again, some of the wonderful things that are going on here and the ways that Black people have contributed towards that. So Black history is really about exploration. So ways that you can honor and celebrate this is just take opportunities to learn more than what may be presented to you in really simplified ways, right? Taking opportunities to do some exploration and learn about some different stories of different contributors who are not just white, right? And specifically who are Black, to understand, again, the nuanced history in America. And even though, again, when you watch TV and you read some popular books, you may not necessarily see Blacks presented in many ways. But just understand there are many, many, many stories. For instance, we talk about slavery a lot. When you hear about Black people in this country, I don't know if you all hear about slavery a lot, but in this country, when we tend to talk about Black history, we tend to emphasize a lot of slavery. Slavery happened, and it was traumatic and exceptionally influential in terms of what's going on with Black people today. But there is a bigger story than just slavery. For instance, during slavery, you had different roles of Black people in slavery. You had some Black people who weren't enslaved at all. You had some Black people who owned slaves. I mean, our story is exceptionally nuanced and complex. But again, often there's just one perspective that's portrayed about Black people in this country. So how you can honor Black History Month where you are is to just do some digging and do some exploring beyond the superficial stories that are presented or the singular perspectives that are presented about American history. So it's opportunity for you just to learn more about what's going on in this country, to unearth or highlight or emphasize or just to understand the different stories that often you don't get told. Yeah, I'll give you an example. When we hear about the Revolutionary War, which is when, America started to fight for their independence, right? We no longer wanted to be a colony under the Queen in Britain, right, in England. So what we tend to hear is all kinds about taxes and tea and all kinds of reasons and all types of things that happen. But for instance, did you know person? So, this is an example of things that you can do to honor Black history, just reading and exploring. These are stories often, again, that we don't tell, right? And understanding, well, why would it be a Black person? Why would this be the first person who was killed in the battle? And he wasn't fighting with England, he was fighting against England. So you may wonder, well, at the time there was no slavery in England, why would a Black person in America be fighting against England? So I'm just saying that's an example of when we talk about the history, often there are lots of stories that, simply are untold. And so Black History Month just provides a really good opportunity for you to start to explore some of these stories. I'm sorry, that was a really long example.
No, it was very, very rich, powerful, and cogent explanation. Thank you. Again, colleagues in Nepal, as Dr. Gibson says, it's an opportunity for us to read and explore and find out the untold stories, because Black history is one of the richest history of human civilization, but there is a lot that is not told, that was minimized or intentionally destroyed. Dr. Gibson talked about slavery. I'm sure you have heard about that. So if you have any questions, you can ask later. In the meantime, there are a few things to note. Again, Black history is a very complex and nuanced history. And not all Black people are the same. There is a lot of diversity, richness, differences, cultures, languages within the Black community. So it's not just one culture. It's a multiplicity of cultures, a diversity of cultures, different backgrounds people have, different family lineages. And definitely that makes it a very, very rich history. If we're talking about, we are doing the right thing. At this point, I would also like to highlight the fact that Dr. Gibson is also a professor. Her research emphasizes the preparation of Black pre-service teachers. There's the importance of pre-service Black teachers here to address the issues of literacy and equity. So that's her expertise. Dr. Gibson, would you like to highlight some of your work so that we can understand Black history also through your experience of being who you are and what you do for the Black community here?
Sure. So traditionally, coming out of the time of slavery, the ways that a lot of Black people started to make money for themselves, they either capitalized on some of the skills they learned as slaves, right? So they started, actually getting paid for some of the work they did when they were slaves. But you also found an outgrowth of individuals who became preachers in churches and teachers. So traditionally, you had an outgrowth of Black people after slavery who became teachers because when people were freed from slavery, there was a surge of individuals within the community who sought to get education. So there were more opportunities for individuals to become teachers. So historically, Black people have had more opportunities to become teachers, but as time has progressed, we've gotten more opportunities to do other things other than teaching. So part of my motivation in becoming someone who trains teachers is to continue to not only inspire, but recruit more Black teachers, because again, we went from being a community that consisted of a lot of Black teachers to being a community with more opportunity. Black folks decided not to pursue education. They're pursuing law and engineering and all types of other fields. So part of my motivation is to ensure that even though times have progressed, that we're still able to recruit really strong and well-prepared Black teachers. This is really important because what research suggests is that Black and white students, any student who is taught by Black teachers is likely to have enhanced notions of culture, and their learning overall is it's just a stronger experience for them. It's important to learn from people who look like you, but it's important also to learn from people who don't look like you, just as a means of understanding different perspectives. So that's something that's really important. And from a reading standpoint, I teach teachers specifically how to teach kids how to read and write. Within Baltimore, just in general, which is overwhelmingly a Black city, in the public school system, I think about 85, I might be lying, I think about 85% of the kids in Baltimore City public schools, which is where Morgan State is located, are Black. And from a reading standpoint, only about 15% of those kids are proficient readers on their appropriate grade level. And so for me, reading is fundamental. It's at the foundation of a lot of the work that you do. You can't become a teacher or an engineer or whatever without reading. And I know I don't need to lecture you all about the significance of reading, but it's really, really important. And especially in Baltimore, that is overwhelmingly Black. We need good teachers to do a better job of teaching Black children how to read. Because again, we talked about racism a few minutes ago. What happens within education systems that are overwhelmingly Black, funding looks very different. It's less typically for school systems that house a lot of Black kids. It's typically not enough money for kids who are coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And in Baltimore, you've got a mix of the two. So it's really important that we do a good job training teachers how to train kids, how to be really good readers, in spite of the fact that we exist within a system that is, impacted by racism, right? We've got to overcome that to ensure that kids have foundational skills so that they can thrive. So that is why I teach reading. I'm also a fourth generation educator. So my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandfather were all educators. To give you a sense of what this means historically, my great-grandfather's mother was born into slavery. So I'm just 4 generations removed from that. But out of slavery, at least on my mother's side, I am reflective of that trend where Black people became educators. So I am a teacher, I'm a professor, I'm an educator because historically this is just the model that I've been shown, and I love it. And I teach reading specifically because we've got to do a better job of preparing teachers to know how to do a better job of teaching children how to read and write, in spite of what their backgrounds are. That's a long answer, I'm sorry.
Wow, that is very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Gibson.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
as I told, Dr. Gibson is an educator, she is a professor, and she is also a fighter for her community because she inspires Black teachers. She inspires Black kids to enhance their reading proficiency, which is so important to be successful in community, right? So she is a community person, and she inspires. She is a great educator, leader. As we heard, just 4 generations back, our family sustained slavery. Very, very tragic. Then the family has been fighting for the betterment of society, and now she's a professor, she's an educator, she's a fighter. So we are all with Dr. Gibson. Dr. Gibson, thank you so much. And I will switch to Dr. Davis. Again, her research interest is actually dress design. So I want to pick your brain one more time, Dr. Davis, because apparel design. So to our loss today, what happened is we got the time confused, right? It is almost 10:30 here in Maryland. And because my colleagues are traveling, you couldn't see them, but I think Ridesh has done a good job putting their pictures. You can tell from the pictures, the styles, the grace that you can see. But maybe at another occasion, we will have a face-to-face conversation where we can see from the cadence of their voice how amazing these people are. And Dr. Davis, I will let you wrap up with your work in dress design, your passion, and how it is impacting community and how it connects to Black history.
Okay, so you guys, I am a fashion professor and I teach fashion design, and I just want to explain a little bit of what I've been working on as well. As of right now, I'm working on a diabetic sneaker that's really geared towards the African American community, because in the United States, the African American community have the highest rate for diabetes or even being a pre-diabetic. So my overall goal is to create a footwear design that's going to cater to African Americans to kind of combat their issues with foot complications and blisters on their feet. And just so you know, if you're kind of wondering, like, what is a diabetic or what is pre-diabetes or anything like that, that is just someone who has really high blood pressure and high sugar intake, where they tend to lead to obesity. And with that, they tend to have really bad foot problems. So creating footwear for the African American community that is stylish, that's not too bulky, and that they're really able to walk in is like really part of my passion. And what got me into teaching was also going to different museums when I was younger, trying to really understand the photos in the museum of the African Americans and what they were wearing. They were all well groomed, so you really couldn't really tell if they were housemaids or or just working out in the field. They were always well groomed, and some of them had some form of jewelry, adornment on. So that really caught my attention, and I wanted to know more about fashion and what happened in the slavery ages as well, which kind of brought me to where I'm at now, of teaching the fashion courses at Morgan State.
Wonderful. Okay, folks. Dr. Davis is a fashionista too. Well, every professor at Morgan State have their own fashion statement. So you must find time to visit once. But again, as you probably heard, she used the word footwear. So what she is doing is she is designing very special shoes. Those are scientifically designed shoes that are not only comfortable, not only help you with your blood sugar level, but also are stylish. So that's who she is, and people at Morgan State are very proud of the impact they have in the community, from their invention, from their work, from their art, from their design. The community benefits. The city of Baltimore, the state of Maryland, and the entire nation. So at this point, I would like for all of us to give a big round of applause to Dr. Gibson and Dr. Davis. Thank you. I see that.
Thank you.
I see the claps, but I couldn't hear it because it was muted. I think Pradesh just unmuted it. Now we are open for questions.
Good evening.
Yeah, please come close to the computer so we can hear you better.
Good evening.
Good evening. Tell us who you are.
My name is Karan Baigar.
Arun.
Karan.
Okay, Arun Baigar, what's your question?
My question is for Dr. Davis.
Okay, Dr. Davis.
What is the theme for Black History Month in 2020?
2020.
Can you repeat the question because I can barely hear it?
What is the theme for Black History Month in 2020?
What is the theme?
What is the theme for Black History Month in 2020?
The theme of Black History Month. Is there any theme for the Black History Month?
The only thing that's going on right now is pretty much expressing to the Black community that for 2020, we need to make sure we go out and vote. So that has been probably one of the main things within Black History Month is it's a reminder to make sure we are expressing our voice and going to the polls to vote, whether it's local voting or national voting for the upcoming president and those elections. So that has been around since the 1920s to make sure that we are exercising our right to vote.
Thank you so much.
Great.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Yeah, I see the claps for Dr. Davis. You can't see, that's why I'm narrating. Maybe I'm being a little too noisy, but I'm trying to help. Okay, we have
Hello.
another question.
Hello, Uttam sir.
Hello, hello. How are you?
Hello, it's do you remember me?
I remember you, but please introduce yourself so everybody.
Okay, it's me, Prem Biswakarma from Surkhet.
Yes, Premji.
Okay, so I would like to ask a question to Davis. What can we learn or what can we implement in our society after learning the history of that Black History Month? How can we implement such kind of histories, celebrations in our own society? As you know that Nepal is also a community of minority people also. So what can the minority people in Nepal learn from such histories?
Dr. Davis, the person who is asking question belongs to a minority community. And it is also a, they also have a struggling history. The laws are there, but also there is discrimination. So he's asking what they can learn and how the Black History Month can inspire them to create a better, just society. I think it's more of a philosophical question, if you would like to.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And also, Dr. Gibson can also join in on this question as well, because she definitely hit on some points that you all can take away. And possibly, I would say, try to do some mini events where you are going to talk about Black History Month, something that we're doing right now, where we can explain it more to the community that you're in your setting. And then also just reading more on Black history, holding some form of event. And Simone, would you like to add to that?
So I think those are really good suggestions, but we're talking about Black History Month, which is significant, but I guess if you all in Nepal have similar experiences where there are groups of people whose stories also are not told, in honor of Black History Month, maybe you simply are going to honor some of the stories of the groups of people who are disempowered, right? I mean, it may be really good opportunities for you to use the Black History Month platform as a means of just telling new stories, just in general. So that's something that you can do beyond telling the stories of Black Americans in this country. Maybe tell some of the untold stories of folks from your own communities that have not been uplifted. It's important for us all to see ourselves and to see ourselves in really positive, in positive light. So this may be opportunity beyond exploring what's going on with Black folks in this country. It may be opportunity for you to do some exploration of individuals from your own communities whose stories have not been told, and to take opportunities to, you know, to tell those stories. Again, for me, Black History Month is about exploration.
Yep, great one. Can I add something there? Because from my experience, Premji, you are still there. Great question asked, and as you heard, reading about Black history will definitely inspire you. And also try to listen to some of the speeches from Martin Luther King, like I Have the Dream, I Have a Dream, and President Obama. You all know, right? So uplift the untold stories, as Dr. Gibson said, right? Organize events. Honor the stories of minority people from your own community. So that will inspire you. That will give you the strength to rise and shine. Keep fighting. Okay, great question. What other questions do we have?
Hello, namaste.
Namaste.
My name is Divyaraj Kharga. I work at the post office in Surkhet, and I used to be Dr. Gaulee's student back in the 90s, I think. So my question is to Dr. Gibson. Dr. Gibson, can you hear me?
I can hear you well, thank you.
Okay, I've actually written down in my mobile, so I'm going to read that question to you. You spoke about Black people having slaves back in the days of slavery. So how can you relate the racial, though we're talking about in Black History Month, though we're talking about the racial discrimination and the racial inequality, how can you relate the racial inequality with the economic inequality? I want to give you one example of Nepal, that in Nepal, there is one quota system for the minorities. Just like Prem sir said, there are Dalits, there are Janjatis and other indigenous people. They are given quota system, but a lot of people who, especially the people from the hills or the people who are of the upper caste, they argue that the quota should be given on the basis of economic status and not racial status. So what is the from the American perspective, from the perspective of Black people, how do you relate economic status, rich and poor, and the relation? What is the relation between wealth and races? Can you say that again? Can you say that from the American perspective? And I think Dr. Gaulee also can relate to that, since he's also very familiar with the Nepali perspective. So can you relate that from Nepali perspective to the United States perspective? So that's my question. And another question, I think it's been a long time that I spoke to Mr. Gaulee, Dr. Gaulee. So I'd like to ask one question to him too. You're from Nepal and you're from hill tribes. You belong to the majority in Nepal. So tell us about your experience from being the majority and having the hill privilege. You're kind of you belong to a privileged caste here, and after going to the United States, you are one of the minorities. You are as an immigrant. So how can you relate the experience from being a majority upper class person to being a immigrant and a minority there? So that's the question for both of you.
Great questions. Dr. Gibson, would you?
So I could hear some of it, and I'm sorry. I could only hear some of the question. I could hear you really well for certain parts of the question, and then others I couldn't understand. Can you help me to?
Yeah, I can paraphrase this for you.
Relation between race and wealth. How can you relate race and wealth?
Yeah, the little bit of context here for you, Dr. Gibson. Nepal is going through multiple political transitions at this point, and they're trying to address the equity issues. And government has started some quota system to accommodate some people from minority communities in the government positions and policy level positions. That system is just to, a way to address the inequality. But there is a contention that the quota should not be allocated to certain races. Rather, it should be reserved for the socioeconomic classes. So there is a complexity. So how does the U.S. System look like in that? From what I can tell, race and inequality are intertwined, particularly here in the United States. Black community is largely, as Dr. Gibson already mentioned, in the Baltimore City public schools, 85% of the Black community, Black kids, come from low-income families. So how is race and the distribution of wealth impacting the society? So he wants to understand that nuance from the American perspective, because it's a long debate, definitely, but he would probably like to hear your perspective, Dr. Gibson.
You know what I think is really interesting? There are all types of reasons why people lack power in this country. And when we often talk about race, I think sometimes we conflate race and socioeconomic status, right?
Yes, yes.
So I think sometimes groups are disempowered. And it just so happens that they are also Black, because again, racism, abounds here. But I think socioeconomic status actually might have even more of an impact on outcomes for people than race even, right? So again, I'm not trying to take away from the race piece. It is significant. But I think sometimes within conversations, when we talk about inequities, we tend to not focus so much on the socioeconomic piece, because that socioeconomic piece sometimes is stuff that you can't see, right? But lots of folks do and don't get opportunities based on their exposures, and their exposures are often based on their socioeconomic background. And so I think the two are definitely intertwined and interrelated. It just so happens that when you come in this country, a lot of Black people, you don't have a ton of middle-class Black people or wealthy Black people for that matter. The vast majority of us are working class or probably a little below that, but that's about what the vast majority of people in this country are working class, right? So I think race and socioeconomic class are intertwined as it relates to inequitable outcomes. But I think what's more pervasive, but a conversation that we tend not to have because it impacts so many more people, is the fact that socioeconomic status probably has an even bigger bearing on outcomes for individuals than race does. I think it is, and what makes it really interesting, you mentioned a few minutes ago about looking up the speech of Dr. Martin Luther King. A lot of people talk about Martin Luther King and the work that he did for racial rights in this country, but towards the end of his life, his emphasis was on addressing poverty, because what he came to realize is the issue of inequity is beyond, it's so much bigger than just Black people. If there are so many inequities for just poor people in this country. And when you start talking about poor people, you're talking about working class and poor people, you're talking about actually the majority of people in America, right? So I think it's something like 0.2% of this country owns like 90% of the wealth in this country. So we're talking about less than 1% holds 90% of the wealth in America. So, you know, again, that socioeconomic piece is a really important piece that just gets lost in the conversation. But I think when we're talking about inequitable outcomes, and it seems like it's similar to stuff that's going on in Nepal, that socioeconomic piece is potentially even more significant than the racial piece.
Yeah, it's a very complex question, and so well put, Dr. Gibson. Thank you so much. So yeah, my understanding again is that there is no watertight separation of race and inequity, because largely the majority, as you heard, 85%, and there's 90% of wealth going to less than 1% of people. So that makes it very difficult conversation. And politically, again, why you imagine the theme for Black History Month is go vote, right? So voting, again, it's political participation. What happens is when people are oppressed, oftentimes what happens is they also are not enthusiastically participating in the political process. So that is eventually not making their own voices heard, right? So there's some voter suppression, as they say, because if a certain group of people is not participating in the politics, they don't have their voice, they don't have their representation, they don't have their fair share. So it's a fight. Again, there are political questions and logics and arguments. People are even talking about reparation. That is because Black people were treated so badly a couple of generations ago. Now we need to find a way to pay the Black people back. So these are conversations, ongoing conversations, but these political conversations will not be heard when there is not much political strength of the power of the voting for the democratic process. So the world is still not ideal. It is still a mess. So we all should be, trying to understand and give voice to this inequity. And definitely, as Dr. Gibson said, Martin Luther King also eventually talked about the poor people who are the majority, right? Race is complicated. Statistically, it is more associated with low SES here in the United States also. But we have to refrain from being reactive. Sometimes what happens is, let me tell you what I observed. Dr. Davis, Dr. Gibson, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? So here in the United States, there was a movement that said Black Lives Matter, because Black young men were more likely to be shot by policemen. So there are some stereotypical things like Muslim is terrorist, Black is a thief, a kind of people's, schema, and that prompts more violence against Black people. So Black young man is more likely to be killed by policemen than a white young man. But reactive people said, white lives matter. So on the surface, it sounds good. White lives also matter, right? But you don't have to say that. That is just a knee-jerk reaction, or that is the surface without understanding. Black Lives Matter is a movement to save Black lives, to protect Black lives for the systematic perpetration that's happening against them for generations. And saying white lives matter, for a lot of people, you know, without thinking, that sounds good. And some people say white lives matter too. So Black Lives Matter movement is not against white lives. But the knee-jerk reaction comes that way, and a lot of people just think it is good and, you know, stand behind those kinds of fake movements. So we should refrain from doing that. We have to understand the history. We have to understand the story. What is behind it? Why do Black lives matter? Why do minorities matter? Because they have suffered. And we owe them if we are in the majority. But the Friends understand that, people who have gone through that understand that, and people who have done the study and research understand that. People who care understand that, right? But a lot of people just give their tribal thoughts. We humans can very easily become like animals when we don't think. So that's why we have to use our power to think and understand and, you know, care. That is very, very important. Thank you. You asked a very good question, and I probably got provoked, but hopefully we did justice. Dr. Gibson, do you have something to add? Dr. Davis?
No. I have nothing to add on that. That was a good question.
Yeah, that was really good.
Thank you for answering.
Thank you. Uttam sir, we have 4 more questions from our students and teachers. Here is Deepesh Sai. Deepesh Sai, who can ask question?
Deepesh Sahi. My question is, what is the significance of Black History Month on worldwide, not only in America? What is the significance of Black History on worldwide, not only in America?
Great question.
Yes, sir.
So,
This question, I think,
Question is Gibson, Dr. Gibson. For
Dr. Gibson, worldwide, why Black History Month is important, not just in America. He has that assumption that it is important worldwide, but how he would say.
Yeah, well, I think when you go throughout the world, I think very often we don't understand the accomplishments of Black people. It's not just an American issue. I think this is worldwide. I think it's just in general, there are groups that historically have been overlooked based on racism, historical racism, societal racism, bigotry. I mean, they're just groups that have been overlooked. And when you go to different, you know, around the world, I think what you find is Black people are one of these groups that have traditionally been disempowered. And so whether you're in America or you are in Europe or wherever you are, I think you'll find that there are really important stories and contributions that Black people have made amongst other groups that simply have been ignored, underexplored, or for whatever reason, just completely ignored. So I think for those reasons, it's important to recognize, you know, people's contributions and their histories. Again, I mean, I have 2 children. It's important, even though some of their history books don't do a great job of emphasizing their histories, it's important for my children to understand that they come from generations of very strong, intelligent, capable people. If you turn on the TV, that's not necessarily the story that they're going to see about themselves. If they're looking at newspapers, that's not necessarily the story they're going to see about themselves. But this is not just a my children issue here in the States. In any country, people need to see themselves in really positive light, because again, based on different historically racist systems, too often we're not presented in really positive ways. So it's important. I don't think this is just something unique to America. I just think there are lots of groups whose stories have just been underexplored, underexamined, and ignored. And so it's an opportunity, you know, to explore some of these stories. And that's not just an American issue, that's all over the world. What are contributions of Black people and other historically marginalized populations who have made really significant and meaningful contributions.
Okay, great, very thoughtful. Yeah, definitely. Black history is very, very inspiring history. It's the history of resilience. All minorities, all majorities, all humans should know Black history. It is the history of innovation. It is the history of inspiration. It's the history of resilience. It matters to all of us.
Thank you. And here we have next question from Mr. Deepak BK.
Good evening, sir.
Hello, good evening. How are you?
I'm fine, sir. And how are you?
This question is to who?
My question is for Dr. Davis.
Okay, Dr. Davis.
What may be the effect of celebration of Black History Month in present world? Or how can I do as a student side, from the student side? What may be the effect of the celebration of a Black History Month in present world?
Yeah, as a college student, he's asking how celebrating Black History Month may help college students, right? You're a college student, Mr. BK?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. BK is a college student and he's also from a minority community, as I can tell. Dr. Davis, you have
He's asking about activities for college students to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So like we mentioned before, Black History Month is the perfect opportunity to explore and research the lived historical experiences within Black History Month. So there are many activities that you can do, because I'm on a fashion perspective inside. Like you all, I have students who actually research fashion designers that that created different products within the Black History Month, and also culture, where they can actually illustrate their designs as well. Also doing more classroom discussions that's very respectful and very inclusive about the culture within Black History Month. Any form of oppression or poverty issues as well relating to the Black community, that can also be part of a cultural learning activity, and we can relate it to what's going on within the Baltimore City as well. And there are some things that you can also have an opportunity to look in libraries and bookstores for cultural significance in a very meaningful and engaging way, whichever interaction that you're looking for. If you're wanting to know more about innovations within Black history, going and utilizing the libraries and bookstores are what we kind of have the students do to display their knowledge of learning.
Great. So Hridesh, do you have more questions?
Yes, yeah, two questions.
How many more do we have? Two?
Two questions.
Okay, we must wrap up. All right, two questions. Great. Manisa Thapa?
Hello, sir.
Namaste.
My name is Manisa Thapa, and my question is for Dr. Gibson.
Okay, Dr. Gibson.
As we all know, we celebrate Black History Month to highlight African American leaders and their accomplishments. What kind of activities done to celebrate Black History Month? I mean, what kind of things are done in Black History Month?
How do we celebrate? How do they celebrate this in the United States?
Great question. Yeah, for the celebration of Black History Month, for the legacy, how do we, what kind of activities are done in the United States? I think that's what your question, right?
So Black History Month looks really different depending on where you go. Remember, I was talking about a little while ago how it's not like one group doing the same thing. It's different people celebrating in different ways. So some groups, for instance, some schools may visit museums. Some schools may have different types of projects done in schools. Some families, they may use this Black History Month as opportunities to have get-togethers, similar to just different religious holidays when you just bring friends and family together to celebrate over food. Some people will travel. I think people honor Black History Month in different ways. So it looks really different depending on where you are, but those are a few examples of how people recognize Black history, and also doing things like you all are doing right now. Again, you're sharing different perspectives, maybe that you hadn't heard before. So you have a lot of speakers, different conversations around, again, contributions and perspectives regarding what's going on with Black people today, but also in the past. So those are just a couple of examples. But again, I think it looks really different depending on which group you talk to, which people you talk to. But those are just a few examples.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's 11 o'clock.
My computer speaks time. Okay, so we have one last question. Is that true?
Yes, here's one last question.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Namaste.
Namaste. I know you. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Kesav Malstress, your student.
Thank you.
It is. I'm very happy today to see you on this webinar program. Sir, I have one question to Dr. Davis.
Okay,
What kind of programs are organized to celebrate Black History Month in USA?
Okay, sounds like a similar question, but it is coming to Dr. Davis.
Yes, that definitely sounds like a similar question asked. So again, pretty much like Dr. Gibson explained, it all depends on where you are. And there are tons of cultural celebrations in major cities. They host Black History Month parties. They even have events where they might show a documentary, like for an example, Harriet Tubman. They might show their documentary and have like a really big group discussion at the end of it. They also have some programs where you can come in and learn different African dances and learn more about the ceremonies as well. And again, understanding the difference of the food, the soul food component, the African, Nigerian, Ethiopian, Caribbean type of foods, because each of those cultures have a major contribution to Black history as well. And a lot of schools in the United States also take their students, whether they're elementary students or college students or graduate students, they also go out to cultural centers like the museums, they can have special exhibitions geared around major innovators within the history in Black culture.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Here in Nepal, here in American Corners, we are celebrating the Black History Month by the poster exhibition of famous Black leaders, the civil rights movement fighters. And every Saturday in this February, we are displaying the movie related to Black heroes, and also through the e-library USA, we display the documentaries of Black History Month, like about the Martin Luther King Jr. And also we have a video conversation like this with you. And on behalf, and sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Hitesh Kumar Kesi, and I'm the coordinator of American Corners. Okay. Plus, also I would like to thank Dr. Davis, Dr. Gibson, Dr. Thomas, and Dr. Gaulee to jointly host these programs with the Star Scholars, Konali Talk series, and American Corners. So, like this way, in the past, in American Corner, we celebrate this Black History Month. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Coordinator, for this. I will end this with a verse of a famous poem by Maya Angelou. How many of you have heard the name Maya Angelou? Can you raise your hands? If you have heard the name Maya Angelou?
Yes.
No. It's famous American poet. Let me read a verse, okay? The poem goes, I ask that American Corner coordinator print this poem and distribute to everybody today before they go back home. All right? Take this with you. So the poem goes, you may write me down in history. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I will rise. So the poem is called Still I Rise. So no matter how much oppression you sustain, you can still rise. This is a very inspiring poem. The last stanza goes, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrous clearly, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Let's all rise in honor of Dr. Gibson and Dr. Davis.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It's good to meet you all. And I hope someday I get to meet you guys in person.
Wonderful. So yes, thank you so much for the standing ovation. These two amazing, amazing women deserve this. Thank you, and we are grateful.
Thank you.
Take care. We love you all. Enjoy Black History Month.
Okay, y'all, thank you so much. I'm going to hang up right now. Y'all, thank you so much. Have a good night or have a good day. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.